Hey guys, tonight we begin a journey into the shadows of history, a world where queens ruled not with mercy, but with poison, daggers and fear, where whispers in candlelit halls decided the fate of nations, and where the line between legend and nightmare often disappeared. History remembers its kings, men with crowns and armies, swords and banners. But tonight, we are not here to remember them. We are here to pull back the velvet curtains of palaces and step into the chambers where women, queens, empresses, and countesses carved their place into the blood-soaked fabric of time. These women were not the gentle caretakers that fairy tales speak of. They were power itself, wearing jewels that dripped not just with diamonds, but with the weight of conspiracies. Behind their silks and perfumes, behind their courtly smiles, were minds sharper than daggers, and ambitions that could swallow kingdoms whole. Some ruled through seduction, others through fear, and some through the cold efficiency of calculated murder. To their enemies they were nightmares that wore crowns. To their people, they were gods and monsters alike. If you think you've heard history before, tonight's story will prove you wrong, because what you're about to discover has never been told to you like this. Not in classrooms, not in textbooks, and certainly not in the safe, polished tones of documentaries you may have seen before. Before we dive in, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to Dead Men's History for Sleep, and stay till the very end, because somewhere in this tale lies a hidden truth, and only the sharpest minds will catch it. So, grab your popcorn, or maybe a glass of wine if you prefer, lie back, and let the darkness of history unfold. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine you were in a palace. The year is not important. It could be ancient Egypt, medieval France, Renaissance England, or imperial China. The air is heavy with incense. Courtiers move silently, whispering secrets into each other's ears. Somewhere beyond the curtains, a queen sits on her throne. Her gaze is calm, but beneath it lies the weight of blood yet to be spilled. This is her world. A world where mercy is weakness, where survival demands cruelty, where the softest touch could carry poison, and the sweetest kiss could seal your death. And yet, people adored them. These queens commanded loyalty, fear, and desire. They were written about as if they were half divine, half demon. And even centuries later, their shadows linger. Some call them tyrants. Some call them victims of propaganda. Tonight, we will try to separate truth from myth. And in doing so, you might discover that the most terrifying rulers in history were not kings at all. Think of Cleopatra. Her very name conjures images of beauty and seduction. But behind that legend was a political mastermind who outplayed Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, only to bring Rome itself to the edge of collapse. Or Wu Zetian, the only female emperor of China, who clawed her way to the throne over the corpses of rivals, even her own blood. Catherine de' Medici, who wore black not for mourning, but for power, and who many whispered kept an arsenal of poisons hidden inside her palace walls. Mary Tudor, forever remembered as Bloody Mary, whose name is now repeated in darkened rooms like an incantation. And Elizabeth Bathory, the Blood Countess, whose crimes blurred the line between truth and nightmare. But let me warn you, these are not fairy tales. Tonight's stories are drenched in politics, betrayal, and madness. And as you hear them, remember this: history is not always written by the victors. Sometimes, it is written by those who feared them most. So, as the shadows grow longer and the night deepens, we begin our descent into the world of the dark queens of history. One by one, their stories will unfold before you, like candle flames flickering in the wind. Beautiful, dangerous, and fleeting. Do not expect mercy. Do not expect happy endings. What you are about to hear is darker, deeper, and more unsettling than you imagine. And yet it is real. Now, let us step into the Nile, where the Serpent Queen waits. The night is warm in Alexandria. The torches flicker along marble hallways, shadows stretching like restless spirits across the palace floors. Somewhere within those walls sits a queen, whose name even today drips with the weight of legend: Cleopatra. To some, she is the ultimate seductress, a woman who wrapped mighty Roman generals around her finger. To others, she is the last defender of a dying Egypt, a queen who tried to preserve her people against the crushing tide of empire. But to truly understand her, you must step into the world she inherited, a kingdom both magnificent and cursed. Egypt in Cleopatra's time was a land of contradictions. On the one hand, it was a glittering jewel, rich with grain, gold, and the wisdom of ancient traditions stretching back thousands of years. On the other, it was crumbling from within, a kingdom ruled not by native pharaohs, but by the Ptolemies, a dynasty of Greeks who had taken Egypt after the death of Alexander the Great. Cleopatra herself was a descendant of Ptolemy I, one of Alexander's generals. By her birth in 69 BC, the once great dynasty was a nest of vipers. Brothers poisoned brothers, sisters murdered sisters, marriages blurred with incest, all in the desperate game of holding the throne. Cleopatra grew up in this world of daggers, hidden beneath silk robes. Even as a child, she would have seen the treachery of her own family. But unlike her rivals, she carried a gift that set her apart. Where her siblings clung to Greek traditions, Cleopatra immersed herself in Egypt itself. She learned the language of her people, something no Ptolemaic ruler had done before her. She studied the rituals of Isis and Osiris, wrapped herself in the mythology of the Nile, and cultivated an image not just as a queen, but as a goddess reborn. To the Greeks, she was a monarch. To the Egyptians, she was pharaoh. But power does not simply rest in titles. It must be fought for, defended, and clawed from the hands of rivals. Cleopatra came to power at just 18 years old, ruling alongside her younger brother Ptolemy III. In truth, it was less a partnership and more a brewing war. Advisors to her brother resented her influence and plotted against her. Soon, Cleopatra was forced into exile, stripped of her crown, driven into the desert. Most would have faded into obscurity. Cleopatra did not. She plotted her return, and here enters the first shadow of Rome, Julius Caesar, the most powerful man in the world. Caesar had come to Egypt chasing debts and political leverage. Cleopatra saw something else in him, the key to her throne. The story of how she met Caesar has been told so many times it drifts between fact and legend. Some say she smuggled herself into the palace rolled up inside a carpet, delivered as a gift to Caesar. Others claim she arrived disguised, slipping past her enemies under cover of night. Whatever the truth, when Caesar unrolled that carpet or pulled aside that veil, what he found was not just a queen, but a storm. Cleopatra knew how to wield presence like a weapon. She was not the unmatched beauty that later Roman poets painted her to be. Her power was charisma, intellect, and the kind of confidence that bent even the proudest men. Caesar, the man who had conquered Gaul, faced Pompey, and challenged the Roman Senate, now faced Cleopatra, and he chose her. Together they reclaimed her throne. Her brother was drowned in the Nile during the chaos, his body lost to the currents. Cleopatra returned to power, not as a girl queen beside a brother, but as pharaoh, with Rome itself as her shield. For a time, her reign shimmered with promise. She bore Caesar a son, Caesarion, and dreamed of a new dynasty where Egypt and Rome could be united through her bloodline. But fate is rarely merciful in history. In Rome, Caesar fell, betrayed by the very men he trusted most, stabbed beneath the shadow of the Senate on the Ides of March. For Cleopatra, the news was both tragedy and opportunity. She returned to Egypt with her child, her eyes set on another rising star in Rome, Mark Antony. Antony was no ordinary Roman. He was brash, larger than life, a man whose love for wine, revelry, and power made him both dangerous and irresistible. When Cleopatra met him, history repeated itself. But this time, it was no simple alliance. It was passion, spectacle, and ambition tangled together. Cleopatra and Antony became inseparable, their union scandalizing Rome. Together, they lived like gods, hosting feasts that blurred the line between mortal and divine, where gold glittered on every surface, and dancers swirled in the torchlight as if the night itself bowed to them. But while they reveled, enemies sharpened their knives. Octavian, the future Augustus, watched from Rome. To him, Cleopatra was a threat, not just to his power, but to Rome's very identity. He painted her as a foreign temptress, a witch who had bewitched Antony and sought to make Rome a slave to Egypt. Propaganda spread like wildfire, coins stamped with her image, speeches denouncing her, rumors that she had enchanted Antony with dark magic. In truth, the real fear was that Cleopatra and Antony's combined power could eclipse Rome itself. War was inevitable. At Actium, the great fleets of Antony and Cleopatra faced Octavian's forces. The battle was chaos, sails burning, ships splintering, men drowning as the sea drank their blood. In the end, Antony's forces faltered, and Cleopatra retreated. Rome triumphed. Antony, broken and dishonored, fell on his sword. Cleopatra, left to face Octavian, prepared for her final act. Here again, history blurs into legend. Did she take her own life with the bite of an asp, the serpent coiled against her flesh? Or was she poisoned by her own hand, slipping silently into death like the goddess she claimed to be? Some whisper Octavian had her killed, a trophy for his triumph. What matters is not how she died, but what her death meant. With her, Egypt's independence died too. The Nile, once ruled by pharaohs, was now Rome's prize. Yet Cleopatra's shadow never faded. To some, she is a seductress who brought ruin. To others, she is the last true pharaoh, a woman who dared to challenge Rome itself. Her story endures because it is more than history. It is myth, cautionary tale, and tragedy woven into one. Tonight, as you close your eyes, imagine her, the queen who dared to play gods against each other, who turned charm into a weapon sharper than any blade. Her name is written not just in scrolls or marble, but in the very idea of power itself. For in Cleopatra, the line between ruler and legend disappears, and as her story ends, another queen waits in the shadows. Across the sea, in a land of dragons and emperors, where a concubine would rise to become the only female emperor of China. Her name was Wu Zetian, and her crown was bought not with beauty, but with blood. The palace walls of ancient China were built not only from stone and wood, but from silence, secrets, and the careful balance of fear. Within those walls, whispers could be more dangerous than swords, and one woman would rise from concubine to emperor, the only female to ever claim the dragon throne. Her name was Wu Zetian. China of the Tang dynasty was a world of immense beauty and brutal politics. Poetry flourished, painting captured the grace of nature. Trade along the Silk Road brought riches and knowledge from distant lands. Yet behind the artistry lay the ruthless machinery of imperial rule. Emperors commanded with divine mandate, their word was law, and the women of the palace, concubines, empresses, and attendants, lived in a world where survival meant submission. Wu Zetian was born in 624, to a wealthy family, but not one of noble blood. From a young age, she displayed an intelligence that unsettled those around her. She was bold, unafraid to speak, and curious about the workings of power in a society where women were expected to be silent. At 14, she was sent to the palace of Emperor Taizong as a concubine. For most girls, this meant a life of quiet service, fading into the background of imperial life. But Wu had no intention of fading. She studied, she observed, and she positioned herself carefully. She did not merely entertain the emperor. She learned from him, listened to state affairs, absorbed knowledge of governance and strategy. While others sought favor through beauty alone, Wu used her mind. Yet, when Emperor Taizong died, palace custom dictated that his concubines were to be sent to convents, living out their days as nuns. Wu seemed destined for obscurity, but fate had other plans. The new emperor, Gaozong, remembered her. Some say he had admired her beauty during his father's reign. Others believe he had seen the sharpness of her wit. Whatever the case, Wu was recalled to court, not as a forgotten widow, but as a rising star. Gaozong made her his favored consort, and soon she began her ascent. The palace was a battlefield, though no armies clashed. Instead, rivals plotted in whispers, alliances were made with smiles, and poison often spoke louder than arguments. Wu faced the Empress Wang and consort Xiao, women who already held power and influence over the emperor. For Wu, their presence was an obstacle, and in the Tang court, obstacles rarely survived. The story of how she eliminated them is chilling. Wen gave birth to a daughter. Soon after, the infant died under mysterious circumstances. Strangled, some whispered. Wu accused Empress Wang of murder. The emperor, horrified, believed her. Wang and Xiao were stripped of rank, imprisoned, and later executed. Whether Wu herself killed her child to frame her rival, no one can say with certainty. But in the silence of history, the suspicion lingers, a reminder of just how far she was willing to go. With her rivals gone, Wu rose to empress. Yet this was not enough. She wanted more than influence beside a throne. She wanted the throne itself. For centuries, Chinese tradition declared that only men could rule as emperor. Women could advise, they could serve as regents for young sons, but the mandate of heaven was a crown reserved for kings. Wu Zetian refused to accept this. When Emperor Gaozong's health began to fail, Wu stepped forward. She acted as regent, issuing decrees in his name, sitting in audiences, shaping the empire as though it were her own. Ministers grumbled, but none dared to openly challenge her. Her intelligence was unmatched. She memorized reports, debated policy, and outmaneuvered every rival. When Gaozong finally died, Wu's son technically became emperor, but it was Wu who ruled. And as the years passed, she cast aside the pretense. She declared herself not Empress Dowager, not regent, but emperor in her own right. The shock reverberated through China. Never before had a woman dared claim such authority. Some called her a usurper, a demon in silk. Others feared her wrath too much to speak. To secure her throne, Wu acted with ruthless precision. Potential rivals were accused of treason and executed. Critics were silenced. A secret police force hunted whispers of disloyalty, ensuring that fear kept her crown safe. Yet her rule was not only cruelty. Wu understood that power cannot rest on fear alone. She promoted scholars of talent, even if they came from humble backgrounds. She expanded the empire's influence, strengthened Buddhism as a unifying faith, and supported the arts. Under her reign, poetry and culture blossomed and trade flourished. For the people of China, Wu's reign was a paradox. A time of prosperity born from bloodshed, but her enemies never ceased. Confucian scholars wrote venomous accounts, painting her as a monster. They accused her of killing her own children, of drowning the court in lust and murder, of corrupting the natural order by daring to rule as emperor. Whether these stories were fact or propaganda, they ensured that Wu's name would echo through history, not as a gentle ruler, but as a figure of terror. Toward the end of her life, old age weakened her. Rebellion stirred, ministers plotted, and her once unshakable grip began to loosen. Eventually, her enemies forced her to step down, restoring power to the Tang line. Wu died in 705, after more than 4 decades in power. She was buried not beside a husband, not beneath the name of a consort, but with the title of emperor, equal to any man who had ever ruled before her. Her tombstone was left blank, uninscribed. Some say this was punishment, an attempt to erase her memory. Others believe it was a symbol, that her deeds were too vast, too controversial, too extraordinary for a few lines of stone to capture. Even now, Wu Zetian's shadow stretches across history. Was she a ruthless killer who sacrificed family for power? Or was she a visionary who broke chains and proved that women could rule an empire? The truth, as always, lies somewhere between. What cannot be denied is that she was the Dragon Empress, the woman who bent heaven's mandate to her will, who rose from concubine to emperor, and who carved her name into the story of China forever. And as her story fades, another rises in the heart of Renaissance France, where a queen named Catherine de' Medici would weave her web of intrigue, a woman whispered to keep poisons hidden in her palace, and whose black-clad figure still stalks the corridors of history. The streets of Renaissance France were alive with colour. Banners hung from high windows, noblemen strutted in embroidered silks, and music drifted through the air. Yet behind the beauty, shadows thickened. Beneath the surface of pageantry lay a world of daggers, whispered plots, and the slow, unseen work of poison. At the heart of it all stood a queen dressed in black. Her eyes sharp as steel, Catherine de' Medici. Born in 1519 in Florence, Catherine came from the infamous Medici family, bankers who became kings in everything but name. Their wealth built palaces, sponsored artists like Michelangelo, and swayed the politics of Europe. But money could not buy peace. Florence was a nest of enemies, and Catherine's childhood was marked by turbulence. She was orphaned young, shuffled between relatives and convents, a pawn in the endless game of Italian politics. To those who met her, Catherine seemed unremarkable, not a beauty, not dazzling, not the type to inspire poetry. Yet those who dismissed her underestimated the greatest weapon she possessed: patience. She learned to wait, to watch, to endure. And when her time came, she would use everything she had absorbed in those silent years. At 14, she was married to Henry, Duke of Orléans, the second son of the French king. It was not a marriage of love, nor of choice. Catherine arrived in France as a foreign bride, an Italian among the proud French court. To make matters worse, Henry's heart already belonged to another woman, his older mistress, Diane de Poitiers. Catherine was sidelined, ignored, her position fragile. In another life, she might have faded into obscurity, another forgotten queen consort. But Catherine's story was not one of fading. It was one of survival. For 10 years she bore no children. and whispers spread like wildfire. The French court mocked her as barren, a failure, but she endured. Eventually, through medical intervention or sheer persistence, she gave birth, not to one child, but 10. With each birth, her grip on power tightened. Her womb became her arsenal, her children her soldiers in the game of dynasties. When Henry unexpectedly became king, Catherine was elevated to queen consort. Yet even then, Diane de Poitiers held more sway over him. Catherine smiled, endured, and waited. Her patience would outlast them all. In 1559, Henry died suddenly in a jousting accident, a lance splinter piercing his skull. His death left Catherine not just a widow, but the most powerful figure in France. Her young son Francis became king, but he was frail, sickly, and ruled in name only. The true power now rested in Catherine's black-gloved hands. She dressed in mourning and never shed it. The sight of Catherine de' Medici in her widow's black became an icon, a shadow walking the halls of the Louvre, a queen of sorrow and menace. Her presence was commanding. Her eyes said more than words ever could. To her allies, she was the protector of France. To her enemies, she was the embodiment of poison. The 16th century was a storm of religion. France was torn between Catholics and Protestants, their conflict spilling blood across the land. Catherine's goal was simple: keep her sons alive, keep her dynasty on the throne no matter the cost. She played both sides, negotiating peace with Protestants one day, striking alliances with Catholics the next. Yet peace was always temporary. Violence simmered beneath the surface, waiting for a spark. That spark came in 1572. Catherine arranged the marriage of her daughter Margaret to the Protestant Henry of Navarre, hoping to unite France's fractured faiths. But the wedding, meant to heal, became a massacre. In Paris, on the night of St. Bartholomew's Day, Catholic mobs turned on Protestants, slaughtering thousands in the streets. Bodies filled the Seine, blood ran through alleys, and the horror spread across the kingdom. Whispers pointed to Catherine. Some claimed she ordered the massacre, a calculated strike to destroy her enemies. Others argued it spiraled beyond her control. History cannot say with certainty, but in the popular imagination, Catherine became the mastermind, the Black Widow of France, orchestrating bloodshed from the shadows. Her legend only grew darker. Rumors spread that she kept a cabinet of poisons in her palace, a secret arsenal of vials and powders. Enemies said she trained a group of young women, her flying squadron, to seduce powerful men and extract secrets, turning love into a weapon of espionage. Whether these were truths or propaganda, the image was powerful. Catherine was painted as a sorceress, a poisoner, a queen who ruled not through faith or love, but through fear. Yet for all her dark reputation, Catherine's rule was not merely destruction. She was a patron of the arts, bringing Italian brilliance into France. She commissioned architects, sponsored painters, and supported astrologers and scholars. She understood that power was not just about survival, but about legacy, about leaving behind a France that bore her mark in stone and culture as much as in blood. Her final years were heavy with loss. Her sons, one by one, proved weak, sickly, or incapable of holding France together. She outlived many of them, watching her dynasty fracture and fade. Yet even as her power waned, her presence was undeniable. Ministers trembled at her glance, and ambassadors wrote of her as if she were France itself. Catherine de' Medici died in 1589, at 70 years old. She had survived the venom of court politics, the dangers of religious war, and the hatred of rivals who branded her a devil. Her legacy was written in whispers, half-truths, and fears. Some remember her as the black-clad widow who drowned France in blood, others as the queen who held a fractured kingdom together when it might otherwise have collapsed. Tonight, as her story drifts into silence, imagine her, a figure in mourning black, gliding through candle-lit corridors, her eyes watching, calculating, always 2 steps ahead. Whether she kept poisons in her cabinet or not, her very presence was poison enough. For Catherine de' Medici was not merely a queen. She was the embodiment of shadow itself. And as her tale fades, another rises across the English Channel, where a daughter of Henry VIII would claim the throne of England and become forever remembered, not for love or mercy, but for fire and blood. Her name was Mary, and history knows her as Bloody Mary. The air in Tudor England was heavy with smoke, the kind that clung to clothes and whispered of burning flesh. It was the 16th century, an age of crowns and daggers, an age when religion was not simply faith, but destiny, power, and death. Into this storm stepped a queen who would forever be remembered by one name: Bloody Mary. Mary Tudor was born in 1516, the daughter of Henry VIII and his first wife, Catherine of Aragon. From the moment of her birth, she was both treasure and disappointment. Treasure, because she was the king's first surviving child. Disappointment, because she was not the son Henry so desperately craved. Yet as a girl, Mary was bright, musical, and deeply loved by her mother. Her early years were filled with tutors, dances, and the soft glow of privilege. But happiness in the Tudor court was as fragile as candlelight, easily snuffed out by the winds of power. When Henry sought to divorce Catherine to marry Anne Boleyn, Mary's world collapsed. The Catholic faith that had shaped her childhood was torn apart by her father's ambition. The Pope refused Henry's annulment, so Henry broke with Rome, declaring himself head of the Church of England. Catherine was cast aside. Mary, once a princess, was declared illegitimate, stripped of her titles, and separated from her mother. The girl who had once been the jewel of England was now a pawn in a brutal game. The years that followed scarred her. She lived with humiliation, illness, and the constant fear of death. Yet her faith remained unbroken. She clung to Catholicism as if it were her lifeline, the one unshakable truth in a world built on betrayal. Her devotion was so fierce, so unwavering, that it would define her reign as queen. When Henry died, his throne passed to his son Edward VI, Mary's half-brother. Edward, a devout Protestant, pushed reforms that tore down Catholic traditions. Mary resisted, openly defying him, hearing Mass in secret, refusing to abandon her beliefs. For this, she was watched, distrusted, nearly imprisoned. When Edward died young, the Protestant nobles tried to place Lady Jane Grey, a Protestant cousin, on the throne. For a brief 9 days, Jane was queen, but Mary would not be denied. With the people rallying to her cause, she rode into London, triumphant, reclaiming her crown. At 37, Mary Tudor became the first reigning queen of England. Her coronation was met with joy by Catholics who longed for the old faith. Bells rang, crowds cheered, and for a moment, Mary was a symbol of restoration. But beneath the celebration, the seeds of terror were already being sown. Mary believed she had a sacred mission, to return England to Catholicism, no matter the cost. For her, this was not just politics, it was salvation. The very souls of her people were at stake. Her first major act was marriage. Against the wishes of many English nobles, she wed Philip of Spain, a staunch Catholic and the son of the powerful Emperor Charles V. To Mary, the match was divine providence, a way to secure a Catholic heir and bind England to Europe's greatest Catholic dynasty. To her subjects, it was betrayal. They feared becoming a pawn of Spain, ruled not by their own queen but by a foreign king. Rebellion simmered, but Mary crushed it with ruthless efficiency. Then came the fires. Determined to root out Protestant heresy, Mary revived old laws against heresy and unleashed a campaign of persecution. In towns and villages across England, men and women accused of clinging to Protestant faith were arrested, tried, and condemned. Some recanted, broken by fear. Others stood firm, even as the flames licked at their feet. The executions were public, designed to terrify. Crowds gathered in market squares as bishops, preachers, and simple townsfolk alike were chained to stakes. The wood was piled high, the torches lit, and as fire consumed them, their screams rose into the sky. Over 280 Protestants were burned alive during Mary's reign. Among them were prominent figures like Archbishop Thomas Cranmer, whose hand, the one that had signed recantations, he thrust into the fire first, as if to punish himself. Word spread quickly. Pamphlets and whispered accounts painted Mary as a monster, a bloodthirsty tyrant who delighted in cruelty. The name Bloody Mary was born. Whether she ordered the burnings with cold calculation or saw them as tragic necessity, the effect was the same: terror, hatred, and a legacy soaked in fire. Yet Mary herself was not the caricature history often paints. She was deeply religious, convinced that what she did was for the good of her people's souls. She believed she was saving England, not destroying it. She prayed fervently, sought counsel from priests, and saw herself as chosen by God to restore the true faith. Her tragedy was that her devotion blinded her to the suffering she caused. Her personal life was no less tragic. She longed for children, desperate to secure the Catholic future of England. Twice her body swelled with what appeared to be pregnancy. Bells rang in celebration. Preparations for heirs were made, but both times it proved to be phantom pregnancies. The shame, the heartbreak, the whispered mockery, it broke something inside her. Philip, cold and distant, left her often, more concerned with Spain's wars than his wife's loneliness. Mary's reign grew darker, her health weaker, her hope thinner. In 1558, after just 5 years on the throne, Mary died, aged 42. She left behind no heir, no child to carry her faith forward. The crown passed to her half-sister Elizabeth, who would reverse Mary's Catholic reforms and usher in an age of Protestant dominance. History, written largely by Elizabeth's supporters, remembered Mary not as a queen who fought for faith, but as a tyrant consumed by blood. Tonight, as you lie in the dark, imagine her not as the monster of legend, but as a woman of fire and sorrow, a queen who believed she was fighting for salvation, yet who will forever be remembered for the flames. Her name echoes not in triumph, but in terror, Bloody Mary. And as her shadow fades, another figure emerges from the castles of Hungary, where whispers of horror spoke of a countess who bathed in blood, whose cruelty blurred the line between myth and nightmare. Her name was Elizabeth Bathory, and her legend is one of the darkest of them all. The castles of Hungary stood against the sky like jagged teeth, their towers looming over forests and villages shrouded in mist. In these halls of stone, whispers carried further than screams, and one name drifted through the darkness like a curse: Elizabeth Bathory. To her peasants, she was the countess whose power was absolute, whose word could lift them into favor or bury them in despair. To history, she became a monster, the Blood Countess, accused of bathing in the blood of virgins to preserve her youth. Between the truth and the legend lies one of the darkest stories ever told. Elizabeth Bathory was born in 1560 into one of the most powerful noble families in Hungary. Her bloodline was laced with influence, her relatives kings, cardinals, and warlords. From the moment of her birth, her destiny was sealed. She would wield power, not by choice, but by inheritance. Yet her family also carried whispers of madness, generations marked by cruelty, ambition, and mental illness. Elizabeth grew up in this world of brutality wrapped in silk, where beatings and executions were part of daily life, and where cruelty was not a flaw, but a tradition. At 15, she was married to Ferenc Nadasdy, a wealthy and powerful nobleman. The wedding was lavish, filled with music, feasts, and gifts. But the marriage was not of love. It was an alliance, a merging of dynasties. Ferenc was a soldier, feared on the battlefield and often away at war. While he fought, Elizabeth ruled the estates. She managed servants, lands, and peasants with an iron will. She was intelligent, calculating, fluent in multiple languages, skilled in law and finance. For a time, she appeared to be the ideal noblewoman, strong, capable, respected. But there were darker glimpses. Servants whispered of her temper, of punishments that went beyond discipline. Small acts of cruelty grew into greater horrors. A servant girl might be beaten for misplacing a thread, another starved for disobedience. These whispers, at first dismissed as gossip, would one day form the foundation of her legend. When Ferenc died in 1604, Elizabeth was left a widow at just 44. With his death, her independence became total. She controlled vast lands, wealth, and hundreds of servants. And with that power, her darker appetites seemed to grow unchecked. Stories spread of young girls disappearing near her estates. Families whispered that their daughters had been taken to the castle, never to return. At first, these were peasant girls, vulnerable and voiceless. But soon, the accusations reached higher. Daughters of lesser nobles, drawn into her household by promises of service or education, only to vanish into silence. According to testimony, Elizabeth's cruelty knew no bounds. She was said to beat her servants until blood stained the walls, to burn their flesh with irons, to freeze them naked in the snow. Some claimed she bit their flesh like an animal, tearing at them with her teeth. And then, the most infamous tale, that she bathed in their blood, believing it would preserve her youth and beauty. The image is unforgettable. A countess, pale and regal, descending into a tub of crimson, the steam rising like a ghost around her. Whether truth or myth, it sealed her place in history. But here is where legend collides with reality. Historians argue whether Elizabeth truly committed such atrocities or whether she was the victim of a political plot. She was, after all, one of the most powerful nobles in Hungary, and her lands and fortune were tempting prizes. Male rulers had long feared powerful women, especially widows who answered to no one. Was Elizabeth truly a monster? Or was she accused, slandered, and destroyed by those who coveted her wealth? The trial that followed her arrest in 1610 was a spectacle. Dozens of servants testified against her, recounting tales of torture and death. Some spoke of hundreds of victims, others of unspeakable rituals. Yet Elizabeth herself never stood trial. As a noblewoman, she was spared public humiliation. Instead, she was confined to her castle at Chejde, bricked into her chambers, with only small slits left for food and air. There, in the silence of her stone prison, she lived her final years. She wrote letters protesting her innocence, begging for mercy, claiming she was the victim of lies. In 1614, at the age of 54, she was found dead in her chamber, her body at last as still as the many she was said to have destroyed. Was she guilty? Some believe the tales of bathing in blood were pure invention, exaggerations twisted by her enemies. Others argue the testimonies were too numerous, too consistent to dismiss. Perhaps she was both, a woman capable of cruelty, whose sins were magnified into legend until she became less a person than a nightmare. What cannot be denied is the legacy she left. Even now her name is spoken with horror. She has been called the most prolific female serial killer in history, the inspiration for vampire myths, the blood countess whose hunger for youth turned to slaughter. Whether fact or fiction, her story reveals the darkness of power unchecked, of cruelty disguised in silk and jewels. Tonight, as you lie in the dark, imagine her castle rising from the mist, its towers piercing the sky. Inside, torches flicker against cold stone walls, and footsteps echo down empty corridors. Somewhere within, the Countess walks, her eyes sharp, her shadow long, her legend eternal. For Elizabeth Bathory was not merely a woman. She became a ghost that history itself cannot exorcise. And as her story fades, another waits in the shadows. From the east comes a queen whose cunning rivaled generals, whose will defied empires, and whose life ended with poison and whispers. Her name was Agrippina, mother of Nero, a woman who dared to rule Rome itself from behind the throne. Rome in the 1st century was a city of marble and blood. Its streets bustled with merchants and soldiers, poets and beggars. But above them all, in palaces of white stone, the game of power was played with deadly precision. Emperors ruled as gods, yet their thrones were fragile, their reigns short. Their lives often ended not by swords on battlefields, but by daggers at banquets. Into this world was born a woman who would rise higher than any dared imagine, and whose name would be spoken with both awe and terror. Agrippina the Younger. She was born in 15 AD, into the dynasty of Augustus, Rome's first emperor. Blood of emperors flowed in her veins, and from her earliest years she was immersed in the machinery of power. Her father, Germanicus, was a celebrated general, beloved by the people. Her mother, Agrippina the Elder, was proud, ambitious, and fierce. Yet this noble bloodline was also a curse. Envy and betrayal ran through the family like poison in wine. When Agrippina was still young, her father died under suspicious circumstances, rumoured to have been poisoned by rivals. Her mother was exiled, her brothers executed. From the beginning, Agrippina's life was a lesson. In Rome, even family could not be trusted. She married young, as most noble women did, to a man of rank and wealth. Yet her true power did not come from her husbands, but from her bloodline and her ambition. When her brother Caligula became emperor, Agrippina found herself at the heart of power. Caligula, notorious for his madness and cruelty, saw threats everywhere, even among his sisters. At first, he lavished them with titles, treating them as symbols of his dynasty. But paranoia consumed him, and Agrippina, once a favoured sister, was accused of conspiracy and exiled. Exile was meant to break her, but Agrippina endured. She waited, as she always had, for fate to shift, and shift it did. Caligula was assassinated, stabbed in the shadows of his own palace, and the throne passed to their uncle, Claudius. Agrippina returned, restored to her place in Rome. Claudius, awkward and underestimated, needed legitimacy, and Agrippina provided it. In time, she married him, becoming not just his wife, but his equal in rule. From that moment, Agrippina's ascent was unstoppable. She was not content to be a silent consort. She appeared beside Claudius in public, advised him in council, and wielded influence openly. Coins were minted bearing her face alongside his, a symbol of power shared, almost unheard of in Rome. Yet Agrippina's ambition reached further still. She had a son from her first marriage, a boy named Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus. History would remember him by another name, Nero. Agrippina maneuvered tirelessly to place Nero above Claudius's own son, Britannicus. She used charm, bribes, and threats, weaving alliances with senators and guards. In 50 AD, she succeeded. Nero was adopted by Claudius, becoming his heir. But Claudius, perhaps realizing the danger, began to favor Britannicus once more. For Agrippina, this was unacceptable. In 54 AD, Claudius died suddenly after a banquet, poisoned mushrooms the likely culprit. Rome whispered Agrippina's name. Whether she killed him or not, her goal was achieved. Nero became emperor, with his mother at his side. For the first years of his reign, Agrippina was the true power behind the throne. She stood beside him in ceremonies, addressed embassies, and her influence was felt in every decision. She believed she had molded Nero into the perfect ruler, her creation, her legacy. But Nero was young, impulsive, and eager to escape his mother's control. The bond that had raised him to power soon curdled into hatred. At first, Nero distanced her from politics, stripping her of honors, surrounding himself with advisors who despised her. Agrippina fought back, reminding him of her role in his rise, threatening to back Britannicus instead. But Britannicus soon died, poisoned during a feast, his final cries silenced as guests looked away. Again, Rome whispered Agrippina's name, but this time, many suspected Nero himself. Their relationship became a battlefield. Agrippina sought to maintain her hold, while Nero grew more desperate to rid himself of her shadow. The stories of his attempts to kill her are legendary, half fact, half theatre. One tale tells of a ship rigged to collapse at sea, meant to drown her in the waves. Agrippina swam to shore, drenched and furious, her survival like an omen from the gods. Another tells of poison and daggers, all failing to claim her life. In the end, subtlety was abandoned. In 59 AD, Nero ordered her outright murder. Soldiers stormed her villa in the dead of night. When they came for her, Agrippina is said to have bared her breast, commanding them to strike the womb that had given birth to Nero. Whether apocryphal or true, it was a final act of defiance. A woman who had lived by power, choosing how she faced death. Agrippina's death sent shockwaves through Rome. Nero, her own son, had killed the mother who had made him emperor. The bond of family, already fragile in Rome, was shattered in the most brutal way. Nero would go on to rule with infamy, his name forever tied to madness and cruelty. Yet behind his rise, and even his fall, stood the figure of Agrippina, Rome's deadly mother. Was she a monster, willing to poison, plot, and manipulate even her own blood? Or was she a survivor, forced by a ruthless world to wield power as men did, yet condemned for being a woman who dared? The truth lies in the shadows, as it so often does. Tonight, as you lie in the quiet, imagine the marble halls of Rome, the flicker of torches on cold stone, the taste of wine laced with poison. Picture a woman walking those halls in regal robes, her gaze sharper than a dagger, her ambition burning like fire. Her name is Agrippina, and her shadow stretches across the empire. And as her story ends, so too does the circle of our journey through the dark queens of history. Yet before the final candle is extinguished, we must reflect on power, on fear, on the thin line between truth and legend. The candles have burned low. The corridors we have walked tonight are empty now, their whispers fading into silence. And yet, the figures we have met, Cleopatra, Wuzetian, Catherine de' Medici, Mary Tudor, Elizabeth Bathory, Agrippina, their shadows remain. Queens, empresses, countesses, and mothers, all bound together by the one thread that history never lets go of: power. What do we make of them? Were they monsters, each one sculpted in cruelty, leaving only blood in their wake? Or were they simply women, trapped in a world designed to crush them, forced to wield the very weapons men used without hesitation, yet judged more harshly for it? The truth lies somewhere in between, as truth often does. Think of Cleopatra, remembered as a seductress, when in truth she was a strategist who dared to challenge Rome. Think of Wuzetian, called a demon, when she ruled an empire that flourished under her hand. Catherine de' Medici, the Black Widow of France, accused of poison and plots, yet also the protector of a fragile dynasty. Mary Tudor, branded Bloody Mary, remembered not for her sorrow or her faith, but for the flames. Elizabeth Bathory, the Blood Countess, perhaps guilty, perhaps framed, but forever painted as a vampire queen. And Agrippina, whose ambition raised an emperor, and whose defiance ended with her son's sword. Each of them lived in worlds that despised weakness. Each of them learned the same brutal lesson. Mercy was dangerous, love was fragile, survival was everything. Men wrote their stories, often with venom, eager to cast them as witches, temptresses, demons. Perhaps some of it was true. Perhaps much of it was propaganda. But what is undeniable is that they existed, they ruled, and they terrified. And that in itself was their power. As you close your eyes tonight, consider this. History is not a clean record of facts, but a battlefield of memory. What survives is not always the truth, but the story most feared, most whispered, most retold. These women may have been victims as much as villains. Their names twisted into curses because they dared to sit on thrones men thought untouchable. Or perhaps they truly were as ruthless as legend claims, but no more ruthless than the kings and emperors who bathed their reigns in equal blood. So what lingers? Not the certainty of who they were, but the unease of not knowing. That is the haunting beauty of history. It hides as much as it reveals. The dark queens of history remind us that power is never gentle. It is taken, guarded, and defended with teeth and steel, and those who hold it, whether king or queen, must always pay its price. Some with their reputations, some with their families, and some with their very lives. Tonight, as the last candle burns out, ask yourself, what would you do if survival meant cruelty? If a crown meant a throne built on blood? Would you choose mercy, knowing it would destroy you? Or would you, like them, walk deeper into the shadows? This is not just history. This is a mirror, showing us the darkness that lies not in palaces alone, but in all human ambition. For the line between ruler and monster, between protector and tyrant, is thinner than we want to believe. The queens are gone. Their castles crumble. Their palaces lie in ruins. Their bodies have turned to dust. And yet, when the night is quiet and the world is still, their stories breathe again. In the silence, in the shadows, they return. Whispers on the wind, warnings carved into time itself. Remember them well. Not because they were saints, not because they were sinners, but because they were human. And in their humanity lies the darkest truth of all. So, my friends, blow out your candles, lay down your burdens, and let these shadows guide you into sleep. For tonight, history has told its story, and the darkness will do the rest.